Good afternoon to you all. We'd like to welcome you to the third session of the second day under the title of Cultural and Educational Institutions in the Gulf Countries and National Identity Building. This is one of the most ربما thorny issues that should be discussed when it comes to building identity in the GCC, particularly if we look at the openness, conflicts, disparities, differences, and also, which is also very important when we look at the genocide that is witnessed in the region as a result of the Zionist aggression on Gaza. This is a very important topic, but also it includes one of the most important issues when it comes to racism. In Kuwait, there is a lot of discussion when it comes to national identity, particularly where discussions are increasing when it comes to those who have no nationality, those who are called bidun. So this is one of the important kind of issues that are being discussed, and perhaps this is an opportunity to listen to our neighboring countries when it comes to these very difficult and very important topics. We'd like to start with Mr. Mohammed Al Yahyai. He has a PhD from Qaboos University and a master's from Leicester University. He is a presenter in Al Arabi TV, and also he was an editor when it comes to the cultural annex. And also, he contributed and authored a number of works. Also, he contributed to the launch of Nazwa magazine, and he has produced a number of documentaries. And he authored The War 2022 that won the Katara Prize, and Najhat Marshall, and also Black and White Birds, and so on and so forth. Go ahead, Dr. Mohammed Al Yahyawi. Thank you very much. I know that the session after lunch is a heavy one, and we try to be as light as we can on you. So that is why I'm going to avoid tackling the editorial and theoretical framework, and I'm going to go straight away into the question that is posed by this paper to see the formulation of the national identity. And we're talking about a very important date in the modern and contemporary age of Oman, and how it was able to reformulate this national and cultural identity that would serve the programs of the authority and that serves the building of a new legitimacy of the new rule of the state that did not have the bases upon which it should be built except history, and history in itself was problematic. So in actual fact, I do not want to fall into nostalgia when it comes to history and the past, as it was the case with many Omani authors, and that Oman, one of the oldest entities in the Arabian Peninsula, and that the rule that we have in Oman dates back to the second century, and that Oman resisted the center of the caliphate in Damascus and Baghdad, and that it was also opposing of the rule that existed, and also they opposed so many other rules since 750. So these are facts. These are the bases upon which I want to build my argument. But what is also right, this entity, this political component and country that was established since the 12th century. So the Omani fleet was one of the three strongest fleets in the Indian Ocean. So we went to India, to Persia, to East Africa, and so on. This is true, but what is also true is that this central state regressed and also became weaker in mid-19th century, and it fell under the hegemony of the British, and that the historical image that we keep in our minds was shattered. And the new authority that came to power in the 1970s had to rebuild this image. This was very difficult, but it tried, the paper tried to understand what was happening. So when it comes to the main hypothesis of this paper is that the modern state through its institutions and not the philosophy of rule, because we have to differentiate here. So the establishment of the state faced a challenge, which is the identity challenge from a political and cultural perspective, a divided identity between a past of wars and conflicts and a modern age or a present time, which is weak and in isolation. I'm talking about the era prior to 1970s. The cultural and official discourse did not talk about a cultural crisis, neither in the 70s nor now. It does not accept the concept of asthma or the term asthma or crisis. Maybe my colleagues might correct me. I do not know of any sociological or cultural studies that have discussed this crisis, but the crisis was present, at least from my own personal view. So this study also discusses identity in Oman as a fragmented identity, and this is another matter. So the question, what are the reasons behind such fragmentation prior to 1970? So the paper talks about the following reasons. First, geography. The geographical location, so is one of the parameters whereby these political components have been established. So the sea is the gateway towards Faris, Persia, Africa, and geography played a role in designing and delineating this kind of identity. So the Oman that included so many regions that have become independent, and there is a difference between the state today and the occupied territories in Jawadir, Makran, Zanzibar. And there is another difference between the state as it is now and what used to be the Sultanate of Muscat and Oman. So it was a state between two different kind of rules, Al-Imama, whose capital was Nazwa, and the Sultanate in the Sahel, and the capital was Muscat. In addition to that, in addition to this division, there was a third division, which was an invitation to establish a kind of a Marxist rule in Darfur. And on this basis, so Oman that we have in the imagination, we the Omanis, this Oman is not necessarily the one that we belong to today as a state. What we have in our imagination, it is much larger, much stronger, but this strength and this greatness is a manifestation of this nostalgia that we have to be very, very cautious about, and cautious about the literature that tackle the concept of nostalgia. So the inside and the outside, so the expansion and shrinking of all these parameters have made Oman a country of two identities, two cultures, two visions towards the self and towards the world. And this has given it a kind of a dual personality, and this was a description by Wilkinson, who is specialized in Omani studies. So it is a state that is open and conservative at the same time. It looks with pride into the past and it looks with bitterness at what has happened afterwards. There are two dimensions when it comes to the identity crisis since the 70s. Here we talk about the cultural reference of the community from a sectarian and from a racial perspective. And also we have the political dimension and identity, which is intersecting with geography when it comes to its internal dimension and other components as well. Oman is an Arab state and its official language is Arabic, as the constitution says, but the people of Oman are not of only Arab origin. We have some other races that live in Oman, although these become Arabized with time. This racial diversity comes with a sectarian and a linguistic kind of diversity. In addition to Arabic, there are some other inherently existing languages spoken by the people of Oman, indigenous people of Oman. It's not like a language that came with occupation or colonialism. Amongst these languages is Swahili, Bluchi, and Shehrij, Kamzari, and so on and so forth. So Oman, it is a diverse state, and this manifests in the cultural identity of the state, which is the subject of our discussion. In addition to Islam, we have Hinduism, we have Baha'ism with a smaller perspective, and we have the Ibadi and the Sunni and the Shia. This racial, sectarian diversity entails that we belong to a common ground with many differences in terms of sectarian and so on and so forth. But the political identity remained, and this is a dimension that we ought to understand very well. So this political identity stayed present since the fall of the Yarubi state in 1744. That included Nazwa and Rustaq, and from the Ibadi Imama was a system of rule, and then moving into the state and the dynasty of Busaidi that took the capital into Muscat and made of the coastal area its center of rule until Sultan Qaboos came into power in the 70s. So this dual system has changed and transformed from this difference of opinion and those who call for the Ibadi system that fell after the fall of the Arubi dynasty, and also this kind of move that is linked to the colonial power, the British, and the severed relations with the Ibadi Imama that goes back to the 8th century. So this has developed into a conflict, into a war between the two parties that continued until 1868 and 1959. We're talking about in excess of 100 years of conflict between two regimes within one state. So this conflict continued after 1959, but this is not our topic of discussion. I do not want to stop there, but this continued after another fall of the Imama state, but it continued at the level of the political discourse. So there is an opposition in the Imam. The last Imam lived over there, and there was another center in Cairo. These two dimensions, the political and the cultural, yes, I feel the power and authority next to me. So these two dimensions have led a kind of a common sense of belonging between the differences when it comes to sect, to color, to language, when it comes to their conceptualization of the optimum system of rule, but not when it comes to one common identity. So Oman remained in the minds of those different people. It remained different images and not one image between what is realistic and between what is imagined. So the image or idea of Oman for those who live in the coastal area or those who live in Dhafar, it is an Arab country with different languages, Muslim with different kind of sects, and a cosmopolitan community due to migration from the Indian Ocean and so on. But with the cities inside, in the middle, the image did not accept such kind of diversity and difference. So this is an Arab country that speaks Arabic and Muslim that follow Ahl al-Istiqama. These are the two attributes of the Ibadi school of thought. And when it comes to the people, the intellectuals in those areas was much of an imagined kind of component, particularly that the impact of politics and economy continued impacting historical movements, and the coast imposed its view on the kind of rule. And this fragmented identity was the challenge that the state faced and the new authority faced in the 1970s. So, how did it deal with this challenge? So this is one of the discussions that you can have an idea or look at because it is going to be in the paper. There are a number of approaches that have been undertaken vis-a-vis what I describe as a fragmental identity. We have different media and educational approaches, but the paper concentrated on the most impactful approach. So the most effective. These are the speeches of Sultan Qaboos, particularly in the 70s and the 80s of the 20th century. When Sultan Qaboos came to power, he came into a country with the diversity of images. Oman, the colonial state, the Imami state, the image of Oman in the south with a Marxist view, the image of the isolated Oman with no structures. So Oman that celebrated him coming to power after his father Said bin Taymour, but also the image of Oman that dealt with his arrival to power with a caution. So that is why it was incumbent on Sultan Qaboos to deal with this main challenge because the legitimacy of the state. So there is a historical old legitimacy of the state, but since the death of one of the most important sultans of Oman, Saeed bin Sultan, Oman, as I have indicated, has known regression, and we have seen the hegemony of the British. So even legitimacy was questioned even within the Busaidi dynasty, since they have faced so many challenges in 1913 after the return of the rule by Azab bin Qais, and we have had the revolution. And after that, the Imam regime fell, and then it came back again to power in 1930. So the legitimacy of the rule was very much questioned when Sultan Qaboos came to power. You have 2 minutes. Sultan Qaboos, so he dedicated himself as the only and most important image of change and transformation in Oman. So this media discourse was formulated, and it created a kind of a comparison between two kind of cases. Lack of education, ignorance, and sickness, and he worked on that basis, and that the system or the regime should gain legitimacy. So So the speeches of Sultan Qaboos, they started approaching geography and problems of geography, which is one of the most important issues that we faced in Oman. And also the ruling team, they were very much aware of this matter. That is why the first step that was undertaken by Sultan Qaboos is that he changed the official name of Oman from Sultanate Muscat and Oman into the Sultanate of Oman. So this is a recognition that Oman prior to 1970 was divided politically. There was Muscat and there was Oman. But also, this was an invitation for the idea of the coastal area and the inner area that are divided, and also the unity since the death of Said bin Sultan. This unity was never achieved until Sultan Qaboos came to power, and he posed the idea of unity. And we remember his speech when he said, let's forget the past and concentrate on the future. And the Omanis started a new process. So many of the indications are there. And I'm going to be brief here. The second approach that was adopted in Sultan Qaboos's messages have to do with history and culture. In his first speech, he talked about the past, he talked about strength, and he invited the Omanis to work in order to regain the past. But at the time when he talked about regaining the past, he was establishing a new phase that didn't sever relations with the past, but parts of the past, particularly the part that has to do with the political conflict. He was very decisive when it comes to this particular point. I'm going to conclude the cultural component, and this is a very interesting component since I'm working on it. In 1975, there was a ministry that was established that was working on national heritage, and this ministry was dedicated to the effort. It was a sovereign ministry. Why was it a sovereign ministry if it is interested in culture and heritage? Because the members were not the persons who were in charge of it were not closer to the ruling circles. The first one, yes, was close to the ruling circle, but the second one, so they were close, sorry, close to the ruling circles, I correct. And there is a third approach, which is the approach of religion, which is the Muslim Oman in confrontation of the Marxist rebellion in the south. So in conclusion, my paper reached the following, that from the speeches of Sultan Qaboos, so the authority was able to delineate a cultural and a political identity. And here we would like to indicate, please allow me, so this was not only particular to the cultural discourse or media discourse, it entered into details to do with humans, even when it came to names. Benbana in Oman, to say this person is the son of this person. This did not exist until the 80s, and after that it was codified. We say that this is the son of this person. This is one of the decisions that have been undertaken by Sultan Qaboos. So on this occasion, even the dresses, the clothes, there are a number of measurements, a number of traits to do with the Omani dashdasha, because the Oman after the 70s, I remember there are some who used to wear clothes or dashdasha close to the dashdasha worn by Dr. Saad, but it had changed afterwards. Thank you very much. So we're going to conclude. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed, for this very, very valuable paper. So you talked about the coastal area, the inner area of the state. This is something that would be tackled during the question and answers. So we can discuss this matter afterwards, and perhaps We talked about the view of Oman of the GCC identity. We'd like to move to the second paper. So this is a joint paper by Saif bin Uday al-Maskari and Dr. Nasser bin Saif al-Sadi. So Mr. Saif al-Maskari, he is a researcher. He's got his degree from Sultan Qaboos University, and he worked as an assistant researcher about the strategic project in East Africa. And also he is a researcher about Omani personalities in commerce and industry. He has authored a number of books, Oman in the peninsula and the Imama and the conflict on power during the dynasty of Al Ya'ariba. So he is going to discuss cultural identity narratives in humanities curricula adopted for grade 5 to 12 in the Sultanate of Oman. The floor is yours, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Ibtihal. Good afternoon to you all. So the narratives of cultural identity in humanities curricula, when we talk about identity, this is a term that is very diverse, and we find it in many disciplines: philosophy, psychology, history, and identity linked to so many aspects. So it tackles so many matters. So this paper will try to target the approach and the presence of Omani identity in the humanities curricula. We're talking about the Arabic language, sociology, and so on. So this is going to be from different angles and also the components of belonging. And we're going to talk about four circles. We have the geographical components, and we have the GCC components, and the Arab components, and the larger component, which is a kind of component that has to do with Islam as a doctrine, as a creed. So when we talk about the cultural identity, we know that schools plays a very important role when it comes to the upbringing. That is why identity should be present in our curricula. So these curricula are distributed, and the politicians, they have a number of components that underline identity, and also to document this linkage between the Omani and the states, the values, the trends, the concepts that are linked to the national identity as it is present in the concept note under the title Education Based on Citizenship. So this is distributed in all aspects of the curricula, particularly when it comes to Islamic studies, Arabic, and sociology or social studies. As it is clear here before you in the diagram that you can see on the screen, we can see the manifestation of that, despite the fact that there is a diversity in terms of the content, but it is clear that the cultural content is linked to cultural circles to which Oman belongs. More than three-quarters of those are dedicated to Arabic, and the values and the trends that the cultural content tries to underline in 53 books. And this table shows the distribution of the schooling books in each and every phase and the titles of those books. So from these titles, these are linked to identity. There is a book about religion and values. My beautiful language, Islamic civilization, and this is my homeland. So these books, they try to instill those political and cultural trends and values. And we'd like to talk about the Omani and GCC identity. There is a definition In the literature of the ministry, they're talking about a number of attributes, racial, ethical, moral, behavioral, and historical, geographical, that distinguishes one group in a particular place from other groups. So this meaning of identity stay present in the minds of the decision makers in Oman, because the aim is to protect these attributes, because we do not want them to be dismantled and to disappear as a result of globalization. So this is recognized in the literature that is issued by the Ministry of Education. And in order to protect identity, so there has been a concept note that indicates and clarifies these components. That is why this has six kind of dimensions. Under each and every dimension, there are a number of secondary kind of components about the distribution of these concepts when it comes to the field of citizenship, as it is clear here, and as you can see, the concept of responsibility. This is in order to underline the concept of identity, cultural identity, and political responsibility holds the first position, in addition to the other kind of components, in order to reinforce this political components. And this is very clear in the components of political responsibility, such as allegiance to the state and also civilizational development and so on and so forth. These components of responsibility, they were in the third position after social responsibility. And after that, we have religious responsibility that came in the position before last. And before reinforcing these components, the decision or content makers, they included many of those lessons that have been divided, including 415 Arabic and others in Islamic studies and also in sociological studies or sociology. So this form shows the dimensions of the study, and it is clear from this form that the objectives that came to reinforce the particularity of Oman came by 26%, and this is the highest percentage compared to all the objectives of such content. For the political decision makers. So the terminology of the ruling family and also the identity, all of them are included. So when it comes to the concept of Omani identity had been repeated a lot, and there are two books. One of them says Hada Watani, this is my homeland, and that includes a unit, a complete unit about Omani identity. And also we have Kitab al-Tarikh, Al-Alam min Hawli, the world around me. There are three units that talk about identity and the different cultural units, and also the national culture and the variables, the changes, and also global responsibility. This is with regard to national identity. With regard to GCC identity, the concept of GCC identity is very thorny, even when it comes to studies and research. Sosan Karimi, a researcher, in her approach, she sees that this identity exists and it has a number of parameters about history, religion, heritage, what is popular, and also social relations. And these cultural terms are not separate from the largest circle that includes GCC nations, which is the Arab circle. But this difference is closely linked that there are threats and risks when it comes to GCC countries and that are linked to their establishment from a social and political perspectives. So those who developed these curricula, and particularly the three subjects, we did not see a great presence when it comes to GCC identity. For instance, there are a number of lessons in grade 7 about old civilizations in the Arabian Peninsula. We talk about the civilization of Nar, part of which is in the Emirates, but they did not present them as GCC countries, with the exception of one text by Ghazi al-Qusaybi, a Saudi Arabian author who was introduced as one of the GCC contemporary poets. In this poem, there are indications to certain things that are related to the identity, such as the sea and the professions linked to the sea. So the content makers try to bring about the matter of identity, GCC identity, although in the literature they talked about the Omani relations throughout history and to reinforce belonging historically to those entities, but this was not reflected in the curricula. There was no indication to such matter in the curricula. Let's go to the Arab and Islamic identities. The Arab identity is not only in terms of language, it is also a cultural component, and we see that from different perspectives. So when we talk about this identity, we talk about language and also the common fate or destiny. So students in Arabic, they study approximately 20 books that include 22 units, and the number of lessons are 74. And we have 20% of the total number of sessions that are taught to students between the 5th and 10th grades. So the time allocated to study in the Arabic language gains the largest share. So this shows the texts and it is clear from these they hold the first position, and this shows that how students are linked to the Arabic and Islamic heritage, and also to reinforce the sense of belonging to the Arabic and Islamic ummah or nation. Some texts concentrated on some contemporary matters such as Palestine, refugees, in order to reinforce the awareness of students against settlements and Zionists, and also to try to achieve Arabic unity. And also there is another kind of topic that is being taught, which is a lesson about a message from the diaspora by Mahmoud Darwish, because we would like our students to have some examples of resistance literature. So when we talk about Islamic identity, this is one of the components when it comes to building of these kind of curricula. In order to reinforce, we have seen many of them that are taught. So the time allocated, and we have all of them come after the Arabic language when we talk about the other specializations. And also we have our identity, which is an Islamic identity, which is taught in grade 12, what is constant and what is not, in the consolidation of this identity. I'm going to conclude with the outcomes of this study. So this study has shown a keenness to include concepts of identity, and this was very clear in the document. And the study has shown a great deal of presence when it comes to concepts of identity from the different components. We have 36% when it comes to the dimensions of citizenship, and the study shows that there was no dividing line between the GCC and Arabic identity, although this was included in the concept note and how to establish a curriculum for Arabic and the importance of solidarity with the Arabic and also the GCC communities. This was not manifest in the curricula. So also the study showed also that Arabic was not only a language but a cultural identity, and this was very clear in the percentage and the time allocated to different sessions. The study also shows that the philosophy of education emanates from Islam, not only in the curriculum of Islamic studies, but also in other subjects as well. So these values have been manifest in all subjects, which means increasing the space allocated to the subject and also the duration of learning. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Mr. Saif, for this very, very valuable piece of information. Perhaps afterwards, we're going to talk about how the topics have been drafted. And I do not know whether you look at it in a positive or a negative way. And of course, also the GCC dimension was not present. And this reminds us of what Mr. Yahya talked about identity. Would like to move to the third paper, and it is going to be presented by two researchers, Mr. Muthanna Al-Masri and Mr. Omar Abdin. So he is a researcher in anthropology and sociology from the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies and has a bachelor degree from Yarmouk University, and he is interested in migration and cultural diversity, integration, and also verbal heritage in the GCC, and he works on a number of research realms such as diving and many other projects. So, what the Syrian migrants are subjected to in Jordan. So this is a paper that talks about identity. This is not something that is separate from the official or non-official spheres. Some countries, they try to establish this identity in keeping with a narrative that they choose to mold and establish. Go ahead, Mr. Muthanna Al-Masri. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. So I am from Al Jazeera, Doha Center for Graduate Studies. I would like to welcome you to the Arab Center. I would like to thank the GCC Studies Unit, Mr. Haidar and Mr. Abdulrahman. So this is a paper that is prepared by myself and by Omar Abdin. So I'm going to be present this paper. We're going to talk about policies of identity building and the culture of diving in the state of Qatar. So the presentation. So first, since I'm not part of the GCC culture nor born in the GCC, my relationship started just recently. After I joined the Doha Institute, I'm going to talk about the idea and the main problematics, and after that, I'm going to talk about the tools and strategies that have been discussed and researched in order to complete this study. And after that, I'm going to talk about the different approaches and what we mean by cultural policies. And after that, I'm going to move from the theoretical into the empirical dimension to see how the Qatari state with its institutions is dealing with the culture of pearl diving. How does it deal with its history? So first of all, I would like to get closer to the context. So this is a quote by common people. This is the spoken Qatari dialect. Those who do not have a beginning do not have an end. This is a quote by Abna al-Bahr. This was a video that was broadcast in 2010 during the National Day. So this shows the linkage between the past and the present and the linkage between both of them. With regard to the idea, the idea went through four phases. So the writing of the history that is sponsored by one of the institutions, and after that we got to know a number of topics. So we try to deepen this reading, and after that, we developed an idea whereby we tried to develop a study about the history of pearl diving. And this idea moved from being a small research into a book. And the title was The Community of Diving, History and Suffering. And also, we have followed what was happening in the field. And there are a number of things that have attracted our attention, such as the cinematographic production, the songs in the state, the real estate, and so on and so forth. So the fourth phase, which is the most important phase, which is the forum for the GCC studies, and after consultations with researchers in Al Arabi Center, we were able to see the policies that are undertaken by the state of Qatar in dealing with this subject. Some would pose the question, why diving? And also the central position of diving, and that diving was the main source of livelihood when it comes to Qataris in the state of Qatar. In addition to that, I would like to say that this is one of the most important components with all its manifestations in the eras that preceded the discovery of oil. So from a sociological perspective, this is a kind of a complete kind of phenomenon, because in it you can find the social rich relationships and also political, social, and cultural systems that are interrelated. And when you look into the history of diving, you will see that there is a legal, a political dimension, there is oversight, there are so many organizations that are part and parcel of this community. And as a result of this impetus, we do think that one of the most important pillars is this diving when it comes to the state and how it presents its identity, its heritage, and so on. That is why we try to see in this paper the policies that are undertaken by State of Qatar in dealing with this matter. In addition to that, unfortunately, I cannot say unfortunately, I was not able to find any study that frankly or implicitly talks about how the state deals with the diving, pearl diving, and how it tries to utilize such history. With regard to the different approaches that have been adopted in order to present the cultural policies. For instance, the UNESCO has defined these practices as are practices made by the state through the different social apparatuses. And there's another definition that talks about a number of methods for a certain kind of methodology. And there's another definition that talks about these policies as pathways of strategic work that the state tries to undertake. For instance, for us, all these definitions are similar to each other and they are convenient, but we decided to define them. And in our case, so we try to form this general seen in Doha. So when it comes to the strategies that we would like to present to you, so I'm going to present to you some of the pictures. So we have the official discourse of the state and also the cinematographic production, cultural production, and also social platforms, and also in order to understand the relationship between these cultural policies, we have used the concept of cultural policies and heritage policies. I have a problem with the laptop. I do apologize. So this is a number of processes that include the process of the preservation of this culture and also the different practices. When you talk about this concept, so this aims to creating the scene that we see before us when it comes to culture today. We would like to move to the cultural policies in the GCC. When it comes to these policies, when looked at the different literature that tackle this subject in the GCC, so most of the literature that have been divided into two parts. The first part is to do with the individual cultural production and how this is observed and reinforced by the state. And the second component is related to the relationship between the cultural policies in the states and the continuation of the identity in the GCC and the components, historical components, with regard to the cultural policies in the state of Qatar. This is the most important part in the research paper. So the dive in community manifests in different parts of the state, and these manifestations, they start from the official discourse, reinforcing the heritage and its relationship, and also the importance of diving and the most important tools that used to be used then, which is the dhows or the ships. And this also manifests in the museum as a verbal kind of memory that presents the official account of the state as one of the most important components of historical dimensions of the state of Qatar, and also the different electronic platforms that try to define the community of diving and the symbols, and also it also includes it in the architectural works in the state of Qatar and Doha.
And also the educational system and academic system reflect the ongoing efforts to present the legacy of pearl diving and the current situation now. There is a need to protect the past, to enhance the national identity. As for the strategies that we observed and and what is the official discourse for the state of Qatar, we noticed that there are two main principles. First, to link the past with the present, to build a bridge between the past and the present. And secondly, to combine specificities of Qatar with the global and like the Amir's speech about the 2030 national vision. He describes the national vision as a bridge between the past and the present. And the Amir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani says that, and previously his father, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, said or had the same message to protect the traditions and the legacy of the country, and the royal family is trying to instill this in the state's institutions, and we see that the Ministry of Culture and Mr. Hamad Al Kuwari says the same thing, that the linkage of the past with the present is part and parcel of the national identity. And apart from the official discourse, we see that this is manifested also in the other slogans. For example, the official emblem of the state of Qatar, which was amended in the year 2022, this is the fourth version. We see that the symbols there, we see four main symbols with swords, sea, the palm trees, and the pearl hunting dhows. And this emblem also combines between land and sea elements, and the government is trying to create a visual identity, emphasizing the important role of pearl diving. And also, for example, for National Day celebrations are the most important national celebration. It's always, the slogans always reflect the protection of traditions, like in the year 2010 was carrying on the footsteps of our previous generations, and also the history of our forefathers, and also there's always the emphasis on the linkage between the past and the present. And we can see that the linkage between what is authentic and from the past and what is contemporary and as to the present. When we visited Qatar National Museum, we noticed the centrality of diving in the history of this country, and how the history is presented in three different ways. And the detailed description using the past images from the past described in a contemporary way. See, that image there talks about the importance of pearl trade, and also the historical tools, for example, to measure and weigh pearls, and the other tools the pearl divers used to do. The third aspect of the narrative is done orally through the stories told about through documentaries or cinematic films of people who actually were engaged in pearl hunting. There are some theoretical studies which talk about the cities and the architectural designs These are the oral narratives used in the museum. And also some architectural designs reflected in investment projects to symbolize also the pearl diving. There is more than one example. I'll give you many examples, in fact. This is Al Janoub Stadium. South Stadium, which takes the design of traditional dhows, and this was in Al Wakra town, as was a center of pearl diving, and people who visit the district called the Pearl. The linkage there is very obvious, and also there is some designs of the landmarks that tourists can visit on the Corniche. One minute. Finally, there are some sponsors which should be mentioned. The Katara Cultural District, which tries to organize festivals like Darb al-Sa'i, Katara, traditional dhows, and other activities. And also the other electronic platforms, virtual platforms to market Qatar. Finally, education as a tool of the state, the educational systems in Qatar, the state tries to develop national identity through the official educational systems and the centers for the protection of the legacy and culture, and there are some textbooks about that, and there are some classes on national identity and how Qatar culture should be protected, tangible and intangible forms, and like Nomas Center and these centers also teach people pearl diving using the same traditional methods to make the new generations aware of the legacy of their forefathers. Of course, there are different publications by the Ministry of Culture. There are some cinematic films like the feature film The Sons of the Sea, which is a documentary which was shown on the National Day. And this is a film which was made in 1980. Thank you. Thank you very much for this very rich paper. And maybe in the Q&A session we can talk about the critical side of pearl diving, and maybe the class differences also. We started 15 minutes late because of the lunch break. We will only allow 15 minutes for questions. Please, please, I beg of you to make them pointed. Then we'll stop the questions, and then we'll take a round of questions and a round of responses. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, what struck me that the Gulf was not present in the statistics. Maybe I understood this. Maybe we have an identity crisis here. We from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I belong to the Hijaz. I cannot call myself a Gulf person. I call myself an Arab. And maybe the same applies to the south and the north of the Gulf is present as an Arab part. This linkage between the whole the part or the the presentation made pearling and pearl hunting as something specific to Qatar. It's in Qatar, in Kuwait, in the UAE, and also is there a difference between the concept of Imam and Sultan, and or do they have different conditions which are different or one and the same from the point of view of terminology and application? Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for these papers. My questions to Dr. Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad, you talked about the national identity was not before 1970 and they appeared in the Sultan's speeches. What about prior to 1970? Even though there was the Imama and the Sultanate as two authorities, there must have been some sense of belonging to Oman as a country. And also, what are the speeches you refer to, like the 8th of August, among these speeches which determined the policy of it? Dr. Nasser and Dr. Saif, you spoke about the absence of a Gulf identity. I remember there was a textbook in our schools in Oman called Oman and the Arabian Gulf, which had lessons about each specific country in the Gulf and their political history. Also, we had another book, a book for the sake of the country for the 10th grade, and also it included projects that students can... So, excuse me, what's your question? In your opinion, now this current approach in the curriculum, does it focus on the national identity more than the Gulf identity? Please, short pointed questions to allow for as many people to take part as possible. Thank you, Dr. Ibtihal. Thank you for the presenters. My question to Dr. What do you mean by the identity crisis in the Sultanate of Oman? Did I misunderstand you because this session comes immediately after lunch? I don't see in any society having one identity. There is one nationality, and the identity is understood through the other. So if the identity has a crisis, this will manifest itself in the society, like in Rwanda between the Hutus and Tutsi, and South Africa. It's also in colonialism. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ibtihal. Thank you to all the presenters. My question directly first to Dr. Muhammad. You talked about consolidating the national at the beginning of the rule of the late Sultan. Can we say that the Omani national identity has been established and then we stop that, or where is the Omani national identity after all this time? A simple question to Dr. Nasser and Dr. Sef. Why you classifying the Gulf identities separately until we reach the point zero? Why do you think it's different than the national identity, local identity, and Arab identity? Dr. Ghanem. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I think everybody did well in their papers, and maybe these researchers they appear to be innocent, but they delve deep. For this reason, Dr. Yaqub said the approach by Dr. Saif in your analysis, and we can offer you that this can be turned into a comparative study using the same methodology. Multiple identities is a natural thing. There is nothing abnormal about it. It's in every society. I worked on Somalia. Somalia is a cohesive society. They all belong to the same ethnicity, all Sunnis, all same language, but the fighting nonetheless was there. Different identities is a natural thing. So there is sequencing in teaching. There are books for the teachers. What do they contain and what are the basis of guidance there? It's not enough. The political discourse is the weakest link in the chain because it changes. But these are permanent things. They last for a long time. I enjoyed what you said. I would like to develop this maybe here at the Gulf Studies Center, and we are prepared to make you the coordinator for this project. Thank you. All my question to Dr. Muhammad. Abu Marwan is well known for his explosive questions and ideas. My question, when looking for a new identity after 1970, there was 70 years after the beginning of the century, the country had a lot of struggles, revolutions, wars, upheaval. What impact did have on the country's attempt to formulate a national identity for 70 years didn't have any impact? My question to Dr. Muhammad, and that's the impact of the colonial factor in formulating identity. And my questions to one sentence. I noticed that linkage between identity and citizenship. Is this a deliberate when you were examining the curriculum? Thank you, Dr. Ibtihal. I congratulate you because you controlled the 15 minutes. 10 minutes have gone. We have 5 minutes. I will help you to one doctor. 1 minute because there is another people. I noticed the absence of the Gulf aspect in the curriculum. My question is the generation we are approaching, do they also not know, or is the Gulf aspect in their identity is absent too? And if this is the case, then this means that the curriculum itself is weak. The other thing, when we recall the culture or legacy, it's not done to consolidate the identity, because sometimes we use that. We say in the past people were more tolerant, more open, and openness and tolerance is part of our culture. So it depends on how you recall culture. Culture can be essential in standing up to exclusionism. There was a famous book in this field, The Invention of Tradition, Hobsbawm. I don't know to what extent that text applies to the Gulf. Thank you. There is one person there who raised his hand before you.
India. And my question is in this panel, when we are talking about cultural policy, how cinema has been one of the very important medium which has been represented Arab, especially in Asia and South Asia. So I have attended this second conference and I'm missing this even in policies, even in academic discourse, and how we are seeing that. Thank you.
Thank you. ناخذ السيدة من هنا.
We take one lady from this side and one lady. السلام عليكم. اسمي من عبد الرحمن. The last my MA dissertation was on cultural identity, but when I researched that, there is something called virtual identity. I think for our youth deal in things different through the electronic identity, virtual identity. I think we should add this. Good afternoon, Dr. Muhammad. You use the term imagined or perceived identity, and in identity invention or making, is there a deliberate attempt to have a larger identity despite the presence of smaller identities, so that we can create a large reference we can use? Thank you for all your questions. We start with Dr. Lahyai. You have 3 minutes. I think we need a lecture to answer, but generally speaking, I will make some comments, starting with what Dr. Badr. He left, so okay, I don't have to answer. For Dr. Bahia, I did not say there was no national identity in Oman before 1970. I said there was a national identity, but it was fractured and it was going through some fragmentation, and it was going through a crisis. So the state wanted to bring everything together, because Oman is a multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnical country, and therefore it has multiple identities. I did not say there was No identity. And in my estimation, there is no such thing as nationality as a fixed term or identity. Our son's identity is not necessarily ours. There is an identity crisis in Oman. There is fragmentation, but the crisis and fragmentation is not necessarily a bad or a negative thing. Everywhere there is the same problems, and everywhere the authorities try to deal with this. This does not mean it is a positive thing, because all authorities try to formulate identities in accordance to their own perceptions. When Sultan Qaboos came to power, there was an attempt to unify the picture, but they did not manage to do that completely. Diversity remained, but so far as there is legitimacy of an Omani identity linked to the authority, no, they achieved a huge amount of success. And in my study, I focused on the speeches in the 70s and mid 80s, and I ended with the opening of Nazwa University and or a mosque rather, but a mosque which was done or opened in the capital of the Imama, but he could have done that in 1970, but he delayed that for 10 years and opened the first mosque for him in the city of Muscat. Dr. Aisha, about consolidating national identity politically, and yes, this is what the authorities are trying to do, but this is something changeable. It's not fixed. It's not something which can have a starting point and an end point, because this starts but it never ends, because we're talking about a process. Saeed al-Hashmi, it's not 70 years but 100 years, the period of wars and conflict since 1861 till 1959, which used to calm down for a period and then ignite again. And there was 70 years of continuous war with the so-called the Far revolutions, which was one of the longest revolutions in modern Arab history, although it is not historicized as it should have, in my opinion. Sorry, we have to leave it there. The Kuwait took part, Bahrain took. You opened the door on myself. Your question. Oman historically didn't have any sensitivity with the Gulf identity. The centrality of Oman was there, but the popular movement to liberate the Gulf and Kuwait started in Kuwait with the Arab nationalists, and the most famous Omani singer Salim Rashid al-Suri started in Kuwait. Abdullah Ta'i and important writers from Oman started in Kuwait and Bahrain. Mr. Saif, 4 minutes. Thank you for all the questions. I'll start with the point. First of all, the meaning of the identity, the approach depends on the researcher himself. Does it represent me and the other, or does it distinguish me from the other? And Dr. Aisha, in this conference, there is an invitation to show the specificities of Gulf countries. So there is the question of identity and national identity. Also, the question why identity. And with Dr. Ghanem, I thank him for his proposal, but in 2018, there was a conference I took part with Dr. Nasser in attending and it was about the presence of the question of Palestine in the Omani educational curriculum. This is Dr. Shamlan. We focused on the curricula, but about the youth, this I think it's there, but we have not dealt with it. We are focused on the curricula. There also Dr. Khawaga about Dr. Muhammad spoke about this as emerging countries trying to I think they're trying to engage in directing individuals, so creating identity is there, whether we're talking about Gulf countries or 1 minute, Mr. Nasser. I just wanted to add some points. Why are we classifying identity and then the result was 0? In the paper of conceptualization by the ministry, this is mentioned. Please. Why did we mention that? Because this article is part of the guidance concept paper by the ministry for this reason. This study relied on the curriculum implemented in 2022. We know there were other lessons which are no longer there. Also, there were some modules in the name of the GCC, not the Gulf, but we relied on the latest version. So sorry to interrupt you, but we have 3 minutes. Mr. Muthanna, sorry. We close with Mr. Muthanna. I have a response to 2 questions. The lack, I said there is suffering, oppression about pearl hunting, but I'm only focused on the symbolism of it as a cultural aspect of life. But for the actual trade itself, it was said that pearl hunting is the most difficult profession on earth. And of course, I did not say it's specific to Qatar. It is spread throughout the Gulf, but my focus was on Qatar. Thank you very much all. Thank you.